This week on Hashknife Hangouts, we discuss fall preparations and events that occur on the ranch following cattle sales. Additionally, we talk about what normally happens over the winter and what we do to take advantage of the so-called slow season. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Kalen. My father and co-host with me is Brandon. Joining or seeing us for the first time, like, comment, subscribe. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the handles below. If you want more entertaining topics, follow me on Twitter. On to today's topic for real, though. Fall preparations and wintertime operations. So I'll tell you what we'd really do. We do preg testing, change animals from summer pasture to winter pasture, talk about winter chores, weather reactions, and then some of those projects during the so-called slow season. So that's really what we're going to talk about. We've already talked about over the past year on YouTube preg testing, which was about a year ago, some of our first videos. But I wanted to open it up to Dad. We're about to do that in a couple weeks or so.
Yeah, the 2nd of November. Today's what, the 17th? So yeah, about 2 weeks.
2 weeks. But so I just wanted to, I'll see if I can find a video. If I can, it'll be linked up above. But can you just kind of describe what exactly is preg testing or pregnancy testing for cattle, and then explain kind of what you're going to do for this year in 2021?
Well, we have to go to Walgreens and buy just a buttload of these little tests.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then have them pee on a stick, and then we stand around and wait. No,
Yeah.
it's not like your college dorm scenery there. No, well, it's just we could do it ourselves. You can do it a couple of different ways. You can, get some training and do a rectal palpation where you reach in through the rectum, with a glove, big old long preg test and sleeve or OB sleeve. If you've seen me use them in when I pull calves, when we've had to do that, then I'll use a sleeve because you're going deep inside that, especially the vaginal canal, not necessarily the rectal, but same thing. You're entering that cow, and you can reach through and feel the size of the fetus growing in the uterus through the rectum, through the palpate through the intestinal wall, the colon wall. So things have gotten different over the years, a little better. And it doesn't take it, like I said, it doesn't take a vet to do it. You can do this with just some training. Go to a school and get it done. For us, I like to be able to see, and this year we're using some of the technology, which, you'd have to buy an ultrasound machine to do this. And for the number of cattle we have, when you're doing 100 head, it's not worth, going and getting an ultrasound machine. Forget it. It's not going to pay for itself. So, and you still get the training to do it. You need to have all that done and practiced at it and be competent. So we have the vet do it, and they, charge us a couple, $2-3 a piece a head to do this job. We, all of the joking and teasing each other is all free. That goes both ways, so it's not a problem. But they use basically a wand. It's the same thing. It's just a long, about 2 foot, 2.5 foot long wand dipped in, just a lubricant going through the rectum, and then they just turn it and find on the, if you imagine a wand coming through my hand, and just you can see them manipulate and move towards the uterus. And they got a display screen on a very small, like a little TV almost, and you can see bones, spine, head. You can see that fetus growing inside that uterus, and then they can take a snapshot of that fetus, and then use basically like a little micrometer. They can go from one side, make a dot with their mouse, go to the other side, measure the distance, and that distance has been correlated to age. On the size of the head correlates to so many days, and so they can calculate that. And that's what we're going to do this year. We're going to age these calves for the first time, because we're going to, the times as tough as they are, we can't afford to have any open cows, which means not pregnant or really late calves. So we'll then sell those. If they're really late, then we'll just sell them as a bred cow. And somebody will want to buy that. And then there's actually a couple people I've talked to that they want to buy our bred cows if we have any. So That's just another way to lighten the load a little bit on our hay consumption. So we'll use that technology, but it's either a manual palpation or a ultrasound, and then ultrasound with just that ability to age. So kind of just a really cool way to do stuff. And of course, when you use the ultrasound, it's pretty dang accurate. There's no second guessing, because sometimes, say for instance, you have a heifer that's not calved before, and she's got something wrong with her uterus. Say it's enlarged, but she's not able to, she's infertile. And sometimes you can misread that because it's a little bit larger than it would be, than what you would normally feel. And it, just by feeling, you can say, oh yeah, okay, she's pregnant. And we've had that happen. And it's not the vet's fault. I mean, I'm not blaming them. It's just kind of the way it is with, you know, a misdiagnosis based on something that's not normal. And, you know, a cow come up, or this heifer come up infertile. I thought, well, she's a pretty good heifer. So we kept her, rebred, did keep her several years ago. And the next time I said, when she came through, that's why your record keeping is important. I said, hey, this cow last year, she showed pregnant, but she was not. Can you look at her a little closer? And I looked with the ultrasound and said, yeah, something, can't really tell. So did a manual palpation and then felt that uterus. And so, because you can also feel a squishiness or hardness. And she said, that uterus is really hard. She says, I think this cow is infertile. So, you know, it cost us to keep that cow for, you know, through the summer and that fall, but she went to town. I mean, you can't keep something that's not going to be viable and produce some calves and a crop for you. So that really, in that instance, it went right back to manual palpation was what was really the thing that said, oh yeah, there's something wrong with this uterus. The ultrasound doesn't pick up hardness, it just picks up an image. But really a cool technology, and anybody can do it. You don't have to be a vet to do that. Training is important.
Here's where I'll tie the topics that we've had together over the past year too, is manual palpation requires physically entering the body of that cow. And we have discussed on 2 specific segments why we disagree with legislation that is barring that, because it is for animal husbandry, and the legislation that has been built for that has been helped to try and slowly erode the beef industry in certain aspects, and that is one of them. And again, it's not to sexually assault the animals, but rather to take care of and make business decisions, just like that one. If that right. heifer came up dry for a second year, you have now lost 2 years of calf crop off of her while paying for her stay, when she could have went down the road. You could have cut your losses, could have gotten at least a couple $100 out of her and just moved on with life. But yeah, that is pregnancy testing in a kind of a quick envelope. But yeah, see if you can find that link. I'll see if I link it up above a second time in case anybody's interested. But that's what we do coming off of the cattle or the calf sales going into winter. But there's also the other portion, which is coming off of summer pasture and onto winter pasture. So Dad, if you can explain, why are there different pastures in the first place? and second, what exactly is a winter pasture? So using that kind of explanation to kind of springboard into what exactly winter pasture is, and why we use it.
Yeah, that's actually, you don't think about that. That's one of those things that seem mundane to us.
Hey, that's why I'm the host. That's why I'm the guy asking the questions.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, and to go back to your original question was, what defines our fall work and winter work? And to me, when you gather your calves to precondition for your sale for in the fall, that's the start of your fall work. When you're gathering calves, getting them prepped for sale, and then, you know, sorting, shipping, you know, deciding who you're going to keep. That's all kind of one large event there over a couple of days. And that's your fall work, working to make sure that you're getting everything ready for your transition into winter. Also has to do with things that are not even animal related in the least. And that is laying in your hay. And so it doesn't seem like fall work it's winter, fall and winter work, but you're prepping for that stuff in May. That's
Right.
when I'm contacting people to start looking for hay, making deals to purchase and to get it hauled in, coordinating with truck drivers to get it stacked so that we're there for them, not wasting their time. And, we're somewhere else doing something, getting it so that it is, ready to go, prepped and stored so that we can just start feeding it off. And we're starting to feed, of course, now with the drought and everything, then we're starting to feed some of these cows, some of the heifers, replacement heifers and pregnant heifers, first time heifers. We're starting to feed them right now on our winter pasture. So the question about winter pasture and summer pasture is typically you will send your cows out to some of your pastures that are furthest away from the house, furthest away from home. They can utilize that grass. It's not hard to get to them. Weather's good in the spring, summer, and then the early fall. And we're, basically just letting them grow, letting those calves get fat and making sure your water and mineral and feed is good. And you're just kind of keeping an eye on them. Then, and one particular case, we've got lease property that is the furthest away. And so, our lease is specific from June through October and ends November 1st. So, we're pulling them off. Last year was mid-October because we had so much snow here that I was feeding anyway. And just like, you might as well feed them at home than feed them on a lease. It doesn't matter that your lease is your lease. And so bring them home, feed them where it's closer. You're not trucking hay or putting it out there on a pickup and having to go so far to them to dump out the hay, where you could still do that in a winter pasture. And winter pasture is nothing more than our close pastures closer to the house, where we do have some grass that's improved better than native grass. And so that kind of helps punch them up a little bit. It's almost a supplement to the hay, not the hay being supplement to the grazing, because it's going to get covered with snow. And we also, early in the calving season, I move everybody off of that winter pasture, the large pasture, because you're going to have a lot of calves pretty fast early on. And so we put them into a smaller pasture adjacent to it. And so I don't really consider that a winter pasture. It's more of a calving pasture, although we can do mix and match, do whatever we want to them. But again, it's real close right there to the corrals and the barns where we can grab a cow and get them in and help them out if they need be. Where summer pasture, we've got some makeshift corrals. And for those that have seen some of the videos on the lease pasture corrals, they're not much, they're just kind of there, and our cattle are easy to handle. So it's not like we're having a buffalo tight, but they're usable.
And people might ask too, they're like, well, why are you even doing it then? Why is it so hinky? Well, the reason is that's also to an extent a business decision. We don't own that land, so why would we necessarily improve it? But even if we were generous enough to improve it, that's like putting all this money into it and never knowing if you're going to get that money back in any sort of sense. And so the reason why is we don't make it any better is it's not our land. So simple as that. We just kind of put things together, make it work for what it is for now, and then we will, if we get the chance to purchase maybe in the future, that'd be great. But if we just use what we have, or add a little bit better things, like maybe a little bit better paneling or a little bit better temporary setup, so that the animals will funnel into the small corral setup that we've got, and then we're able to move them, transport them to and from when needed.
Well, and I've put in a pipe head catch frame so that I can move our portable head catch over. And, we put some makeshift chutes using panels, good rail panels, the heavy stuff, and put in some posts. We're doing that, but it's not permanent like what you would do all steel like we have right there at the main
Right.
place. So, but when we can put calves in there, and we can still catch them one at a time in a head catch and precondition and keep going. It's easy to do that. So, but it's not as easy to bring a cow into something like that, because it's a lot larger pasture as well. That winter pasture is only about a section, just under a section in size, or 600 acres in size, where the summer pasture is 3 sections. And so it's a lot harder, or not difficult, but it just takes a lot more time and some more difficulty on an animal to say if it's lame or something's wrong with it or something needs some help. In the wintertime, you're close. And that's where you tend to have more of your issues, especially around the calving portion of the season. So that's, and a lot of people have a winter pasture that's not necessarily improved grass. It's just closer. That's it.
Right.
You graze your further stuff away first through the spring or late spring, summer into the fall, and then if you've got a lot of different pastures, you're moving them from one to the next, getting them closer to home all the time.
Now,
Idea is not to run cattle back and forth so that they're not going to weight off those calves either.
yeah.
Right.
The other part is winter chores. So looking at pregnancy testing, moving animals from one pasture to the other, getting them closer to the house in preparation for winter storms, which you guys already got a little bit of snow in the first storm, correct? Just a
Yeah,
skiff.
there wasn't much. It was only 3-4 inches, 5 inches
Yeah.
maybe, but it was gone within a couple days. Wasn't bad.
Nonetheless, winters is finally arriving to Montana. So you're starting to prep for winter. What are some of the typical chores? I've got on here for notes feeding. Feeding is a big one. And then on top of that, people don't think about it, but water, making sure animals have water. So food and water. Are there any other winter chores? And can you explain what exactly goes into those two very simple chores each day during winter?
We'll start with the water. Is we gotta, you gotta make sure that your water's sustainable, that everything's good. You've got your springs open, your tanks are good. You don't have any water line issues, and they're gonna stay open. Then on the other part of that is you may have water going someplace where if you don't drain those lines when it gets cold, they can freeze and break. And so I've got some water lines that are open, drained, or blow air through them, and they lay stagnant until it warms up and doesn't freeze during the night. We've got a couple of nights so far that have been down in the high 20s, low 30s. So it's froze, but some of the pastures that we have water tanks that are fed by lines that are, they're not deep buried lines. So you move those cattle or horses off of those pastures and dump that water out of that trough, empty those lines out, clean them out, or so they can drain out, and prep for that so you don't break any hydrants deep down because water is not fully drained back, or it's a vacuum is holding that water in the line. You got to break those lines apart on the connections and make sure that they're free to flow so that you don't freeze a hydrant at the ground level or just below where it can freeze and then expand and break and it'll fish mouth, and then you've got a mess. Then you've got water everywhere and got to dig it up. It would not be fun. So there's several of those. That's kind of it for the water. Believe it or not, fencing is still another thing. I mean, your summer fencing it's really for year round, but it's especially important in the wintertime too, because especially when you need to keep bulls separate from cows. And wintertime or springtime when you're calving, I like to have all of my pregnant cows in one small pasture, relatively small pasture compared to the other. And then as I calve or as I have a calf, we've maybe seen on some of the videos, we're moving those pairs to the bigger pasture where then they're just free to go until we brand. And that way I can keep an eye on, half a dozen cows and calves at a time. And I keep a count in my head how many we should have out here, who's calved, where they're at, whether it's heifer or little bull calf, and tagged appropriately. And once it's tagged, then I just kind of give it a few days where that calf can travel well, unless they're really close to a gate and it's easy to push them through. Then I'm doing that. So fences are important because sometimes those cows want to come back and forth, especially early on when there's only a few, and they'll see you feeding in one pasture and they're like, "Hey, what about us? I know where the hay's at." So, they usually don't go through the fence, but some could. And so it's just good practice to keep your fences up. Also, along with that is we have a lot of blowing snow here in this part of the country. We have heavy snow. That's one thing, but we also have a county road crew who sometimes is a little lazy about what they do, and you know where I'm headed with that.
Yeah.
You have to keep your cattle guards clear. That's just, I mean, that's just something that's every landowner's obligation. You have to do that. But they will just seem to either scrape through the cattle guard and make it look like there's nothing there. And of course, a horse will go through there or try to go through there. And we've had one happen where they broke a leg and the county had to buy a horse. It was not fun, not something we wanted, but you know, they didn't care. So I would have to go through, and there's a couple of cattle guards on county roads that I've got to this week now. Get a little reprieve. I don't have any hay coming, so there's a really good opportunity to hook up a tractor to the bucket and lift those cattle guards out of the way, clean them out with a bucket of that tractor, and so they have plenty of room for that snow to fall down through and not hang up. I mean, because if we didn't clean them, that'd be our fault. But they're filling up with dirt, and they get, oddly enough, they get filled with dirt fairly fast off the county road when they blade it. So you figure that one out. So I got to clean those out. It just makes it a little tougher, but you know what? It is what it is. We do what we got to do to make sure that we don't get animals going across cattle guards and break legs. And so that's part of the fall work as well, because you know, it don't snow in the summertime, and they see those bars, especially horses, they mind them. They even if there were just bars on top of the ground, they usually won't step over them. But in the wintertime, you know, they don't think about that. So that's something we have to prep for. Where I'm placing hay, being careful there, because of the snow drifts, you may or may not get in or around or out. So you keep an eye on where you place things, where you put a trailer. For instance, you may not lose that or use that trailer for 3-4 months. And that's rare for us to not use one like that, but we got several trailers, so it can happen. You don't place those where snow can build up and create a drift around them, and then we're fighting that issue. So then there's making sure that your equipment is working. You know, you've got oil changed, that's ready to go for the winter time, so you're not doing some of that work. If you have to change you know, fuel pump or, you know, whatever, batteries, make sure they're up to snuff and going, because the first thing you're going to do is get a cold snap and something's not going to start. So going through all your equipment, your tractors, your bale feeder, just your equipment like that, even if you're using a side-by-side, making sure your snow plow, you can get to it with your tractor. These are all things that are just, you don't think about much, but it's just, you got to do it. Nothing worse than needing a piece of equipment to do something now and you can't get to it, or it doesn't work. Now you got, you know, we were down a couple of days because we blew a hydraulic line while I was plowing snow, and I was lucky it was right there in the yard, because we got that tractor in the shop real quick where we could get it thawed out. You know, it was 25 below. It was brutal, and got it in there, and Braden and I worked on that, tearing the tractor apart, pieces and parts, just to try to find it was fun. And then once we did and isolated the hose, knew it was okay, take it off, go to town, get a new hose, put it on, and we were ready to go again. So you know, you kind of keep a look around you. We got a neighbor that's 92 years old. He's out there trying to plow snow with a little Husqvarna type lawn tractor he got a plow on the front, you know, and it's like, it gives him something to do. And I know he grumbles about it, but I think he kind of enjoys being able to do that. But when that snow is down there, you know, he hit a 10, 12, 13-inch snow, he's not moving that with that. So you're kind of watching out for each other and run that thing down there, plow him out, and then in 20 minutes or so, which would take him all day, well, he couldn't do it in snow like that. So making sure people can move, getting to your hay, being able to put it where you need it. All of those kinds of things are things that you think about ahead of time. You just don't do them at the spur of the moment.
Now, you talked about a couple of things that I didn't think about, but water specifically, people think, especially in Montana, we may not get snowstorms on a regular basis. And when I mean a regular basis, I mean like once a week, once every other day or so. Like I'm actually used to more on the East Coast, but what will happen is a lot of the times you'll get snow and then it'll freeze and it'll just stay. And once snow really hits, it doesn't really ever go away. It's just always a land full of water and ice. Really is what happens. Um,
Yeah.
but even with that, people assume, oh, you don't necessarily have to worry about the water with the animals. They've got the snow.
Mm.
You want to correct that real quick?
Well, you think about any kind of a survival course that anybody's taken. If you've done anything like that and talked about cold weather survival, the last thing you want to do is eat snow. That will just suck the body heat out of your body. You'll get hypothermic, and you will actually spend more energy warming that snow for what you get out of it in thirst quenching ability than you would if you scoop it, you heat it, and drink it.
Right.
That's what you got to do. And the animals are no different. When you start feeding an animal, you really should keep feeding them, especially horses. You start feeding a horse, they need to keep eating and or keep it in front of them because they can paw, they can do that, and they can do it. But when they start on that diet, they need to keep going. The same with cows. A cow can't paw. They will dig and they'll swipe their face back and forth and just work their way down a little bit, kind of like a buffalo does. But still, they're way better off if you can keep them fed up and keep those bellies full. One of the things that's really super important is when you feed dry hay, you better have plenty of water for them. They got to have that water.
Yeah.
That's super important, and it's liquid form water. The snow doesn't work, just like you say. Your water intake increases in the cold because of the dry hay, and if you don't have that water available, you couldn't eat enough snow. And I've seen horses dink around and eat snow, but not for survival. They're just messing around, and like you said, we'll get snow. It'll hang on. Sometimes it'll melt off. We get more snow. It'll come back. It'll melt off. You get snow and it keeps building up and it'll melt a little bit and then get a crust on the top. And that's tough going. You get a half inch a crust on top of the snow is tough. And it usually doesn't get that thick. It'll get, I don't know, an eighth inch or a little bit more. But you're borderline on ice on that time or type of snow like you would see on the East Coast. I think you get more ice storms there than we do here. We get them here, but not like they do in the Midwest.
Well, yeah, it's
East.
interesting because being in Kentucky last winter, it was very much ice storms with a little bit of snow because it was heavy, wet snow. But in New York, it was constant snowstorms, even a little flurries here and there, but constant snowstorms. But it was very light, powdery. It's exactly what people would want if they're going skiing or snowboarding, but it's just constant. And then of course, lake effect snow is a real thing, and we
Yeah.
get within a couple hours multiple feet. So it's just two very different things, but here in Kentucky it tends to warm up and melt pretty quickly. It might be icy for a few days, but it's only a few days, whereas I'm used to, once you see snow, it's not going away. And like you said, it might warm up enough to 34, 36 and really start to melt, but then it can ice and crust over and then it just snows on top of it. So then you have to be careful of, okay, there's ice underneath the snow and stuff like that.
Well, we have a lot of times in the wintertime where it'll snow a bunch and then warm up enough that the ground is mostly clear, but it's harder than a brick bat. It is, it
Yeah.
takes nothing to freeze it back down at night, and it will stay that way. I mean, that ground is brick hard. So it's I can't imagine having that East Coast snow, lake effect snow with the winds that we get. Nobody would move. I mean, you would just be you'd be
Yeah.
sitting in place.
I also laughed because people also thought that it was very windy in northern New York. I had to remind them that I was from Montana. All right, moving on. Winter reactions. We get snowstorms on occasion, which I already talked about, which can be deadly for us, the community, and the livestock for multiple reasons. We talked about plowing, but is there anything to add to those two? And what are some other things that you kind of talk about? And when I mean winter or weather reactions, I mean like snowstorms, really bad snowstorms, or maybe not so bad snowstorms, or even it's a beautiful sunshine, warm day and it melts like you talked about, and we get maybe a early spring Chinook. What are some thoughts with like weather reactions in terms of working on the ranch and getting things done?
Well, there's sometimes you may or may not even be able to move. If you get a quick melt, a lot of snow and then a quick melt, and the ground isn't yet hardened or froze, you know, in early fall, you may not be able to move around much. You're stuck, and so you just kind of wait for it to either freeze up so you can move on that ground, or it's muddy, super muddy, and you'll just tear your ground up, tear your fields up, rut it up. Not what you want, you know. So you just adjust to that. But we cuss the wind a lot. You know, we are always like, oh,
Yeah.
wind. We live in it, and we're used to it, but it wears on you. And I don't know whether we've mentioned this before, but uh, my dad asked my grandpa one time. He said, "Dad, why the hell did we settle in this country?" Because it was one of those, you know, 30-mile-an-hour wind days where you just, well, where we're at, you open one side of the pickup
At a
door
time.
at a time. You don't open both
I was
doors at
thinking
the
about
same
that
time.
the other day. I
Yeah.
was out at the motor pool, and guys just start opening doors and jumping out, and I was like waiting for the other guy to go. I was like, oh yeah,
I've done
just like
that.
hopped out.
I've done that.
It doesn't
Yep.
matter.
I've done that in with somebody's pickup that's not used to that, and they're sitting there waiting for me to get out, and they're going, What are you doing?" I go, "Well, I'm waiting for you to get out." They're like, "Why?" I go, "Oh, the wind's not blowing here. Never mind." You
Yeah.
know, and then I explained, "Well, if you do this, that's how you clean your vehicle. I mean, everything gets blown out." And so it was one of those days when they were together, and my grandpa says, "You know, we kind of forget about that stuff." He said, "But when we first come out, his dad, our ancestors, come out and homesteaded this country. They come out from that Minnesota area, deep snow, again, lake effect type snows around there, deep snow, and everywhere they went was on a sled or sleigh or bobsled. And they said they got here and they noticed that wind kept these ridges blown clear where they could get around, and cattle could actually graze, and
Yeah.
some had sheep could graze on those deals where you can't do that back in the Midwest as easily like that. So that wind was kind of a tool. It was a good thing for them because they could actually move, and without and you know, with a wheeled vehicle, not necessarily with a big huge sleigh or sled or something all the time, and had some grazing ability. So you know, you forget about what you've got and why,
Yeah.
and or didn't realize it until you were told, and you go, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense."
It also makes you tougher too, because I'm telling you, understanding how to bundle up in the wintertime in different areas, one of the greatest gifts God has given me. Because there's a lot of people that are like, why are you bundled up that way? Like, isn't it gonna be cold? I'm like, we don't have wind. We're good. We'll be working. We're all right.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and there's oftentimes I wear just a vest in the wintertime.
yeah.
Unless it's really cold, you don't see me wearing anything other than a good, you know, like an Outback. I like those Outback oilskin products like that because they do cut the wind. Carhartt, good product. But you'll see me with no sleeves, you know, a lot of times in the wintertime because you're just used to it. And yeah, and if I'm a little cold, just work a little faster. You'll warm up, you know.
Well, it's
So
like
it's
when I'm home normally, because I'm not used to the cold back home like I used to be. I will normally do a sweatshirt with a Carhartt vest over the top, and that's perfect for me. But then when it is a little warmer, I'll do a long sleeve tee with a Carhartt vest, and that's perfect. I love it. And then especially, moving around like you're saying, it keeps you warm. And then of course, all year round, I will wear Carhartt pants. It's not cooling at all in the summertime. It is ungodly hot, but it will protect you. However, in the wintertime, they're decently warm and they'll keep you around because of that double front. But yeah, I mean, Carhartt, everything, it works like a beast.
Yeah, Carhartt's good. I just the last few years really I've only started wearing Carhartts much on pants because your mother's bought them for me because you guys
Yeah,
wear them, you and your brother, and she
they
thinks I
work
need
for
to
me.
have
That's
them
why I
because
grab them.
yeah.
But
Oh yeah, no, and I'm wearing them, but they're, you know, I need look, I got one of those tushies that need to be showing off in Wranglers. So just saying.
hey,
Carhartts don't do that, I guess.
if you got a nice if you got a nice asset on the butt, um, you don't need to have Wranglers. You can still fill out a
What?
Carhartt pair. Just saying.
Okay, when you say fill them out, that does not mean it's small and uh
Listen,
visually
I
acute
I am
for
the
someone
smallest of
to
the three of us, and I can still fill out a pair of Carhartt pants. I think we're okay.
so you got a fat butt is what he's saying. That's I heard it plainly right there.
Uh,
But no, it's you know, it's got to be very cold in the wintertime before I put on insulated coveralls. I mean, it's
yeah.
brutal cold before I do that. And
Well, And then normally the time I've seen you do that, it's either um we're gonna be stationary in somewhere
Mhm.
cold for a long period of time, or you have to for some reason be working on a a vehicle or piece of equipment that's down outside, and that's just to try and keep you from getting too cold from the wind.
The wind, and yeah, if there's no wind, I'll work at 20 below, 25 below for short periods of time. I mean, till my hands freeze up. My hands
Yeah.
are when you can't feel your hands and feet anymore, and they hurt, and they just you can't use them. Then you got to go in and warm up. You got no choice. But those pants, I'll just wear Wranglers out there unless that wind's blowing, and then something like that. And I'll bet you I don't do that twice a year.
Yeah.
The rest of the time I'm out in that stuff just with regular old Wranglers. But yeah, it's about what you get acclimated to, and we're all like that here. It's nothing special. I mean,
Yeah.
most people I think are like that.
Other what are other winter reactions? Is there anything that you can think of off the top of your head? Or is it, I guess what I probably should say is a lot of the times it's reactions to equipment and house reactions. Because like last year, I think you were cussing the boiler for a while trying to
Oh,
get that thing done just before winter set in, and
oh,
power
winter was here.
outages and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was starting to panic a little bit because the boiler was not firing and couldn't get it to fire, and it was in that 35 to 40 degree range during the day. The house was still warm, but that pipes run into that boiler house that's not attached to the house, and they go underground. And I was scrambling trying to get things to work and trying to call guys, and everybody's busy. Those first few storms, you get people who they
Mm-hmm.
don't have any heat, and they're trying to get
Mm-hmm.
to everybody. And there's a guy there locally that was for most people, they're not gonna care. But Wallace Mechanical in Lavina, little town 15 miles to the east of us, and he was a godsend. And he spent some time on the phone with me and texting with me. He says, "We'll try this," and finally ended up going and changing out a complete control module. And I had to go to Billings and get that. And of course, you start out with the simple things, the thermocouple, clean it up, see if it'll work, if it'll fire. Because sometimes it just gets sooted up and it doesn't see a flame or get an ionic transfer across the uh, the element on it, and so it'll act like won't allow it to fire because I'm putting gas in this thing and no fire. Well, if you clean that up, and then you can see that it'll detect or sense the heat in there and the fire, and it'll keep running. Well, that wasn't it. Um, Changed that control module out, redid everything, and I'm checking different things with a volt ohm meter while it's trying to fire, while it's running. Bang, got it to work. And I was like, oh, thank God. Right at the last, that was at like 11 o'clock at night, and it's cooling off pretty fast, and I'm out there, you know, trying to get it to done. But yeah, making sure that that's running. I just did that. That boiler system for the main house is it's an abomination. I want to change that thing because it's glycol filled system, and if it gets a little bit of air in there while you're trying to charge it back up and it loses charge, it doesn't want to work, and it's just I don't like that system at all. It's 40 years old, I think, something like that, a little over 40 years, and uh, it's going to suck when we do that, but it's coming out of there, and we're going to do like a ground source heat pump or something like that, but little lower maintenance. But that's one of the other things, fuel. You're making sure that your propane tanks are topped off in the summertime when supposedly it's a little bit cheaper to do it. Not this year, not the way prices have gone up.
Yeah. Well,
We're
it
no
might
longer
still be
energy
cheaper than it
independent.
will be this upcoming winter, though.
Oh, it's going to keep climbing. There's no stopping
Yeah.
to it. And then make sure the diesel tank is filled. The diesel tank has got an additive to it so that it won't gel up in the cold weather, because a tractor won't do you any good if it can't get some fuel through it. So you make sure that your diesel tank is full with your additive in it. Your gas tank is full for your pickup, because you got to feed. You got to feed that thing every day or every other day, depending on what's going on. Um, keeping feed in front of cattle and horses is important. So, it's just things like that. Making sure you got plenty of hydraulic oil on hand in case you need to something happens. You blow a hose or you got to do something and you got to fill it back up. You got to have all that stuff on hand. Uh, Same filters. You may have to change out a fuel filter if it does freeze up, or the water filters on the tanks themselves. They have a water catch, so that you're knocking the water out before it goes into your fuel tank. Well, that's got to be drained out. And sometimes those they all have a filter in them, but we've had to in the wintertime. It's been so cold that's gelled up that it won't even flow out of the tank. So pulling that off of there, warming it up, putting another filter in, and I've actually got it warmed up a little bit and then blown in it, just put it up and blow it, and you can see that stuff. It kind of waxes up and it would just, backflow out of that filter. So small things like that, you can shut everything down for the want of a $7 filter, and
Yeah.
you're stuck. And so now you got to ride to town, a 3-hour round trip, and so there's things like that you want to prep, that you've got on the shelf ready to go. You've got your coolant or antifreeze. It works the same way both directions, just lowers and increases the freezing point and the melting point or boiling point of liquids. So that's what you're running in your radiators. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that. It's just where you're placing equipment at, because once it's on the ground, if you have something laying on the ground, you may not find it again for a while. So making sure
or
things
it's
are
frozen to the ground and you can't pull it off the ground.
Yes. Yeah, frozen to the
What?
ground
It
is another
freezes
good
to the
one.
ground? Yeah, it does. It
Oh yeah.
freezes to the ground.
Bales will freeze to the ground. That's why
Yeah.
I want that hay in. And again, that's a pre-winter or fall work, even though it's happening in the summer, late summer, early fall. You want that hay laid in so it's on bare ground, bare, dry ground, not bringing that in when it's got snow on it. Because we've gotten a bind like that where a truck driver couldn't get things together, and brought it in finally, and we're plowing out a place in the snow just for the truck to come in and unloading it, and then setting it down on the best place you can get where it's cleared off enough to put a bale on, but it's still got snow underneath of it, and they will freeze down. And that sucks when you've got strings and you'll
yeah.
break a bale trying to lift it up off the ground.
Oh yeah.
So,
Now,
they're little things. Having electrical cords out and stations where you're plugging our vehicles in to keep them warm, keep the tractor warm if you can't get it in the shop. Things like that. I mean, you've got electrical cords out there with block heaters on these pieces of equipment.
yeah. Yeah. It's little things. Moving on to the last thing I had, which was projects. So there's different categories of projects, but this is considered the slow time of the year. Why? Because these are the months where there are the least amount of animals on the ranch, because all the calves are gone, cows are pregnant, and mares may be pregnant, but everybody's kind of just stationary. All these things that we have been talking about are mostly preparatory, but it's not really anything in execution other than making sure water is flowing, water is open for the animals, and then feeding. And then that's really it. And if there's any emergent or issues that occur, taking care of those. But there's also other issues or other things to do, which are, hey, we can't really be doing anything outside. We can if we absolutely need to, but it's mostly using the shop or something to kind of improve things. So you're always looking towards what needs to be used for next year. So we're typically using the shop to fabricate, create whatever for that next year. Or there's also fun projects, which Braden has been working on his old inherited 1962 Chevy pickup.
Yep.
So there's stuff like that, which Dad talked about in our 1 year segment. He'd like to start sharing some of those projects. So as I start getting videos, we'll slowly compile them and maybe put them into a small series of videos and put them into a playlist that people can enjoy. But what other things are there like that you normally do, and maybe even what's kind of the project for this year? You've already created the hay spear because out of necessity you have to have it ready for the winter, but what other things are there that you are doing this winter in preparation for the upcoming year, or doing for fun, or just, hey, we've got the time, let's take advantage of the time and do it?
Well, the one thing that's necessity right now is it's kind of like part 2 for this square bale feeding that we have. We have never used, well, we did use square bales one time, and your grandpa, he rigged up a sled, and it was
some sort of contraption. Yeah.
Oh my God. He was an engineer. I mean, he could build stuff out of nothing, and it was very ingenious that way. But I want to do it better. And so I am right now about halfway done building a contraption that just sits on the back of the pickup, uses the same bale unloading technology, or it's just hydraulic arms that reach down and grab a bale, pick it up, you can set it down and then unroll it. Well, these are square bales. You don't do that. So I've figured out how. I did a couple of bales, trial and error, to see what I needed to do. I had it in my head, and so I was kind of right what I needed to do, how to do it. But a little ramp that's going to sit on the back of the pickup now, that I can pick the bales up, set it on it, cut the strings, tie the strings down, and then just tie the strings to the bale arms and push the bale off, and having the strings basically push the bale. And then I can drive, and just the flakes will fall off of this as it hits the top of this, because I've got it at an angle coming from the front to the back of the deal, and then it'll beaver tail down a little bit, so that when you pick a bale up, it'll come up and then set down, and then the strings will push it back out. Well, as it hits this portion, then it flakes off, so that you can just set that bale out. And I think it's going to work pretty well. So I'm about half done fabricating that right now. Maybe I'll have that done this week, and that'll be nice, because Braden helped me feed a single bale to some of these heifers this morning, and he was not happy, and I don't blame him, because
I mean, it's also morning and it's my brother, so the two don't
mix
well.
Well, yeah, it's later in the day. He was happy by then, so
okay.
But he's like frustrated. He's like, "Oh my God, these." And I said, "I know. I'm trying to get this thing finished, and it seems like whatever you do, just you get one thing after another, And then I got sick, and so that was down. That knocked me on my feet, or off my feet, for a little bit. And I got bucked off, and I'm still trying to heal up from that. Oh, that's just, it's getting old isn't any fun anymore. It's a privilege. It's a privilege, but it's not a fun privilege. So, friend of mine, Jack Walker, says this: don't ever forget, it's a privilege. A lot of young guys that have not been able to get old. So never forget that it's a privilege, but it's
him of all people know that probably pretty well.
Him of all people, yeah. So once I get Braden's parts in and we can get his pickup out, I've got a table that I'm working on that I laminated out of 2x4s. It's big and heavy. And then I've got a sleigh in there that I tried to get rebuilt last year, and it just didn't happen. We were working on Braden's pickup the year before. So, and I was working on this other table, but I got a sleigh that I'm going to try to rebuild. It's not an old one. It was one that your grandpa had built, and then I'm just going to kind of refurbish it. And then I've got a really short wagon that he started to put together, and then I'm going to redo it and try to improve it so that it's got some brakes on it, because we got a young stud that is coming 3 years old that needs some work. And these are some things that, I can spend a couple hours, instead of just running out and taking an hour to fill up salt boxes and mineral boxes. I can throw this stuff on the back of a little wagon, and he can pull that. Make him work.
Give him put his energy towards something useful.
Yeah, well, it's a short time in the spring that I can do that before he's with some mares, because I don't want to bother him when he's with mares. He's got another job that's more important to both of us, actually. So, but I got a couple of those projects, and that cleaning that shop is a never-ending deal. It gets just filthy and misplaced because you're in a hurry doing stuff. So you set stuff down and you're trying to get through it and get things back up on the road and get going. And so it kind of goes by the wayside. So a good cleaning out is the first thing that has to happen. Really, really work that thing over and make it look decent, organized, and things out of the way.
As a parting, as a parting segment, I guess, what is the funnest or most rewarding project that you have worked on ever, when it's been either winter time, or it could be summertime too, but mostly I think winter time, because that's normally when we're really in the shop doing a lot of things. What's been the most rewarding one for you?
Well, the difference there is when you're in the winter in the shop doing something, generally as a project, there's no hurry to it.
Yeah.
Time is not of the essence that it has to be done right now. That does happen, like with a breakdown, but when it's a project like that, it's it's nice that you don't have to. You can quit when you want to. God, I don't know. We've done so many things. I think anything that you can build to make a job easier,
Mm.
I think, is rewarding. When you can, kind of fabricate something out of your head, and make it work, kind of like the corrals. That really wasn't shop work, but it in a way it is. It was prep work through the summer. And, I spent, well, Connie and I and your mom as well, we spent 18 days putting everything together, putting in posts, poles, cross pieces, the chutes, hanging gates, building a ramp, 18 days. And it was successful when it loaded. That first load of cattle loaded in less than 3 minutes. And that was like, yeah. So those are kind of nice. That wasn't necessarily a shop project, but things like that. Anytime you can
Well,
make something and it's sustainable and it lasts forever. I mean, I'll
yeah.
die and you'll be dead long after these corrals
That makes sense to me though,
need to be
because
redone.
it's something that you look at it and you're like, hey, remember when we didn't used to use this? and suddenly like,
Right.
oh man. And then like you go down stories. But like when you can look at a thing or a series of things like the corrals, because even the corrals, I knew what would happen with it. I knew what the outcome would be. I think we all did, especially
Yeah.
because I was getting
Well, we
pictures on
hoped.
a regular basis from mom, but I was so far away. I remember seeing you guys putting the brace post it, the bigger post, the vertical foundation essentially to everything. It was just a giant corral full of vertical posts. I was like, okay, cool, looks great. But I
Looks
also
like you're
knew,
growing posts for a
yeah, but
crop.
I also knew like in time when I came home and I got to see it in person, because that was the other thing too. Eventually I did see panels and stuff. I was like, oh, this looks cool. But I was like, I can't appreciate it until I'm there. And then when I got to look at it and see how it's set up, I was like, oh yeah, this is nice. And then you're like, how did the other day I was thinking about this again. Back when we used to have the corral system all split by essentially snow fence down the middle, and it was just worn and gray. And I was like, man, that was so long ago. And it that's just a
Yeah.
distant memory now, you know?
It was basically, it was an old, it was a windbreak
Yeah.
area for animals to get behind, but it was on the outside of the fence line. Yeah, and I mean, I grew up with that like that. I mean, that was that way from the time I was a little tiny kid. It was old then.
Yeah.
And it just didn't. It had no more life in it. It had way outlived its usefulness, and it was then become a more of a hazard or a pain in the butt to work around. But some of the things that happen, uh, the thing I made to wind up, um, wire, old wire, was a big deal, and I looked at that. How can I do that? And you don't just put something together. I don't most of the time, and it works perfectly like you want it the first time. You got to tweak this a little bit or that, but generally the thing is, and that was no different. But I built that so using the bale handler, that you could, instead of rolling up a roll of wire that's 4 foot tall, and you start with that, and you start with a single wire, and it is arduous,
Yep.
and you got a
Especially when you're by
mile.
yourself.
Yeah, well, and really two people can do it, but it's still slow, and you're getting everything cut up, and you're cutting up clothes, and this stuff is old and brittle, and this fence was 7 wire fence, 7 wires, almost a mile long, and so we that's going to take it is going to take a week just to roll the wire up once we get it off the posts. I thought there's got to be a better way. So I used the hydraulic spinner on for the post hole digger and put a rod on that. And then I put a couple of things on there like a cone shape and that were removable. And then had your mom in the pickup, and we did a 1/4 mile at a time, because that's what the fence comes in to the brace posts. Reset, Braden and I reset all the brace posts. So we were ready to go. Just roll that wire up, put a new one down, pound your post, and put the wire on. It was going to be that quick. We took that thing I made. First time it didn't work. I had to make a tweak on it. Second time I went, okay, this is gonna work. She's in the pickup running it, and it was moving so fast. I had to tie a flag onto the end of it with a little weight so that you could see it waving in the grass coming way back and know where it was at. And I'm just standing there with a crowbar, just working it back and forth, or spud bar, on making a nice tight little roll of wire, and we rolled that fence up in, I think it was something like under 4 hours, something like that.
It's
That
impossible.
was
It took me a better part of 3 weeks to undo a five it was a six. It was a 6 line fence on a quarter mile one time.
yeah. I mean, so we cut days off of that. We did it call it
Yeah.
a half a day. Well, our days, that's like a third of a day, say 4 hours. And that was satisfying because it took all the work out of it.
Yeah.
Nobody got cut up, and
Well,
the
because
stuff is
that's what I'm thinking
manageable.
about. Like what I'm talking about is the 6 lines where I was doing the 4 foot thing by myself, getting cut up. I would take extra things of wire, stick it in my back pocket. So I would go so far, wrap
Tie
it
it up.
to other ones so it would stay together and keep
Right.
going, and then wrap it again. And I would do that like, okay, I'm gonna get this string done today. Okay. And I'd get it done. It'd take me that whole afternoon because it was like it's too hot to work horses, so I'm gonna go do this. And so
Right.
I'd get that done today, and then a couple days later it's like, okay, I got some time, I'm gonna go do this again, and I'd get another string by myself with extra little cut loops so
Right.
I could throw it together. Yeah, it that cuts a lot of time off.
But that was satisfying because I loaded all of those rolls. There were like, I don't know how many total, 20 some rolls of this wire that we rolled. It were slightly bigger than they come from, the manufacturer when it's new, but it was tight like that. It was compact, and we just took the tractor with a bucket and rolled them up because they were all in the same spots. Rolled them into the bucket and took them home, and they went to the scrap pile. And then I took them to the recycler later on. But that was a nice, satisfying one. That was that was a big deal.
Well,
Things like that, though. It's just a lot of things, little things like that you don't think about. People go, oh, you should patent that. And I'm like, why would I patent something that I look at something and go, oh, I can build that at home? They're going to do the same thing to me. It's not worth it. It's just too simple.
Well, that is fall preparations and winter operations. Bringing everybody in from winter pasture or summer pasture into winter pasture, pregnancy testing, prepping for winter, reacting to winter weather, and then getting projects done. And a little bonus at the end, some of the rewarding projects that we are able to make and we have done in the past. So with that, I'll give it to Dad.
And then prepping for calving. I mean, it's all about that. It's
all
one thing runs
cycle.
right. It's a big circle. What do they say? What is that? Hakuna Matata?
Hakuna Matata.
Right? Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I hope that's I mean, there's a lot of little things that probably left out that's not worth really that much of a mention, but it's the same thing. Everybody does it every place. And we'd really like the help. If you want to come help, we can do it. We can't pay you, but we can thank you till you're better paid.